Greetings, comrades. Let me tell you about the situation in France. The coronavirus didn't arrive like some explosion in a clear sky. Just a few days before the confinement began, we were out demonstrating together against the pension reform. The class struggle has been on the rise in France since 2016. That year, it was the fight against the labor code reform imposed by a so-called left-wing government, the Socialist Party. That was the final act of a sort of bipartisan. French governments for years had been alternating between center-right and center-left. Macron promised to solve this crisis if elected president. He said he was the alternative that could re-establish the strong domination of the bourgeoisie. The opposite happened. In 2018, the massive revolt of the Yellow Vests erupted. It occupied the streets of Paris and other big cities. For a few weeks at least, it was the boss's turn to be afraid. The Yellow Vest revolt upset usual routines of the bureaucrats and the unions and seeped into the labor movement, as we saw later in the huge fight against the pension reform. It was a return to class struggle. Our comrades have been at the center. In the fight for pensions, our comrades put tremendous energy into building a coordinating committee among bus and commuter rail workers. It is the movement's deepest expression of self-organization, independent of the union bureaucracy. One of our comrades, Anas Kazib, is the best-known figure and main spokesperson of this coordinating committee. So the health crisis came in the midst of a class struggle, and the best we can say about how it's been managed is catastrophic and criminal. France is an industrial country. We have Airbus, Renault, Peugeot, Citroën. We haven't been able to produce enough masks, a piece of paper with rubber bands, and make sure everyone has them. Our healthcare system's supposed to be the greatest, but we failed to provide gowns for caregivers who use trash bags instead. They've been forced to rely on contributions from everyday people just to do their job, which is to save lives. What did the French government decide to do to fix its mismanagement? Unleash the police. There's a sort of two-tier containment. It's not the same in working-class neighborhoods as elsewhere. There's a double standard. Working-class neighborhoods are suffering the worst spread of the virus. Not because people don't follow the confinement rules, it's because they're mostly frontline workers forced to go to work. As if that wasn't enough, their neighborhoods are crawling with police, sent to manage them through brutal repression. In these neighborhoods, we're more likely to be beaten by police than tested for COVID-19. The media has been covering the police more and more, but they keep saying it's just a few bad apples on the force. No. These methods of population control have a long history. France tested them in its fight against Algerian independence, then used them in its corner of Africa, and now to control the suburbs where workers and immigrants are living. The bosses in government are doing this to prepare for the post-coronavirus world. We have to fight for our world after the pandemic, not theirs, which they try to impose with clubs and widespread surveillance, where some will have no jobs, others will be forced to work twice as hard. We have to fight for our own post-pandemic world. I work in the aeronautics industry. In March, we fought to close most of our plants. There's nothing essential about delivering aircraft to airlines that have already grounded their planes. Airbus and the government immediately tried to reopen the plants, even if that meant hundreds of thousands of masks being diverted from healthcare workers. There is absolutely no logic in that, but our alternative makes sense. Workers' control. Workers should control the health measures. We can't count on the managers. Workers should control the company ledgers, especially when companies claim financial distress to justify their layoffs. Workers should decide what gets produced and what doesn't. We should decide what's needed, what's useful in this pandemic. It's about converting production, a critically important issue. We declared we'd be proud to produce ventilators, masks, sanitary hand gel, anything useful in fighting the pandemic. The bosses have always turned a deaf ear to that. Now some say they'll convert some of their production to making masks, but they're doing it under capitalist logic. So, we're hearing about masks being sold at newsstands for €5. The capitalists see a market, a place to make profit. It's criminal. That's their conversion of production, not ours. It's criminal. It's like auctioning off life jackets on a sinking ship. Here's our idea of converting production. We want to make ventilators, masks, gels, whatever, for whoever needs them, not to sell to the highest bidder. And more concretely, in Africa, French imperialism still plunders resources. There are only a few dozen ventilators for millions of Africans. We would be happy to make ventilators for all workers to have them, French and African. No borders, no discrimination. Comrades, the only border we recognize is the line between classes. As tensions between countries are growing, this bears repeating. We oppose all patriotism. The left-wing patriotism of a social democratic populist like Mélenchon, or the reactionary patriotism of Marine Le Pen of the National Front. We stand against imperialism. We are for internationalism among all workers. That's the basis for our fight for a mass revolutionary party, one that brings together militants and currents from different traditions and backgrounds. It's our perspective inside the new anti-capitalist party, for a regroupment of the NPA and Lutte Ouvrière, debating lessons from the recent class struggle. We're fighting for a party that goes even further, that brings together trade unionists and other workers who've been on the rise. Some of the yellow vests, militants from working class neighborhoods, young people, women, everyone who is moving toward anti-capitalist politics. We believe it's possible to build a party with a clear revolutionary program and strategy, one that fights for communism, one that fights for a world after the pandemic that will be organized to serve our lives, not their profits.